Vancouver's got a little bit of a secret. If you're buying a home in Vancouver, the likelihood is you're not going to be buying a house. In fact, in 2023, just 26% of buyers bought a house in Vancouver. Why is that? And if people aren't buying houses, what are they buying? And by extension, if you're moving to Vancouver and you're going to buy something, what is it that you're going to buy and where? Let's get into all of those questions and find out the answers right here in this video right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team. If you're one of my regulars, well, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here and about to become a regular viewer, this channel is all about living in and moving to Vancouver. I put out videos just like this one every single week. And this week, we're talking about why people aren't buying houses and why you might not likely buy a house if you're moving to Vancouver. There's some very good reasons for it. Some of them are obvious. The fact that we live in a very expensive marketplace being one of them, but some of them are not so obvious. And I want you to understand exactly why that might be. And if you're not buying a house, what kind of properties are you likely to buy and where are you gonna find them? So in my opinion, this all begins with the desirability of the inner city in Vancouver. This is unlike most North American cities. There was a real move in urban planning and development of cities to redevelop the downtown cores coming out of the Second World War. So they were trying to get rid of what they viewed as a blight on the city. And really where people wanted to be was the suburbs. So they were pushing people out into the suburbs by improving road networks. As North Americans sort of became wealthier, there was more money to spare, more disposable income, people were buying automobiles, and they wanted to use those automobiles and they wanted to live in nice, lovely sort of suburban environments. You know, imagine the single family house, the white picket fence, the double car garage, and children laughing and playing in the streets. In order to get that, they were building these inner city highways, destroying the downtown cores of these cities, areas that were lower income, basically where people couldn't object to what was happening. And this began in Vancouver, and we began that project with the decimation of what was at the time the African community of Vancouver, and unfortunately that community was destroyed. But it did not continue beyond that. There was a real outpouring of anger and a push against this development that it stopped. And as a result, we have a downtown core that really sort of naturally progressed. We didn't wipe it clean. We didn't wipe that slate clean. And the communities around it, immediately adjacent, have also been allowed to progress naturally. They weren't torn down and decimated to make room for highway systems that have sort of taken place in many other North American cities. And the result, as long as I can remember, and even before I was born, the downtown core of Vancouver was a very vibrant, interesting, livable space, and people wanted to live there. So a lot of the development that's happened in the last 50 years or so has been to make downtown living even more desirable. And in people's mindsets in Vancouver, downtown living has been an option for decades. It's never been that the only option if you make a little bit of money, if you see some success, is to move out into the suburbs where it's safe, or that's the only place where families can live. That's not the way that our city developed. It has been very much from the outset, the downtown core and the areas immediately surrounding it. Keep in mind, our downtown core is incredibly small. It's just about 4 kilometers square. The city itself is only 115 square kilometers. So people either lived very happily in the downtown core for decades or moved out, as they got a little bit older, to a couple kilometers away. So in those communities that are immediately surrounding the downtown core. And this is one reason why living in houses or buying a house hasn't necessarily been sort of at the forefront of Vancouverites' minds. Because if you're driven by the desirability of living downtown, where things are close, where convenient, you have great shopping, you have access to transit, everything is walkable, you're close to your work, you have really good community amenities, things like community centers and libraries and pools, and just all the fun that you might want to have at night as well, going out to the bars, going out to the restaurants, plus being incredibly safe. We don't have a particularly high crime rate. Yes, there is issues with petty crime, and specifically sort of on the eastern side of the downtown core. core. But in relation to what it's like or has been like in many other parts of North America, and definitely in comparison to what it's like in the rest of the world, you can feel safe walking Vancouver streets at night. And so for all these reasons, people have felt very comfortable living very close to the downtown core in more densely populated areas and in areas where there are no houses. And so as a result, because of that desirability, what they've been building in those areas are condos, and especially right in the downtown core. I mean, we're seeing 20, 30, 40-story buildings being built with hundreds of living units in them. And increasingly not just 1 or 2 bedroom units, but 3-bedroom units as well, as they realize that families are choosing to stay in those incredibly densely populated areas. So the next thing I think that's important to understand is just how popular condos have been in Vancouver. An option other than houses has been around for a very long time. At the moment, we divide ownership to create condos through the Strata Property Act. But even before that was implemented in the 1970s, we were dividing parcels of land amongst many owners. So the original way that people were doing it through the 1950s, and in particular in the West End, as I talked about in the last section, that is an area where we saw the original densification. And very early on, it was just building apartment buildings. But as they realized people were willing to and wanted to own in those areas, they came up with an idea of co-op ownership. And so essentially, you purchase shares of a company that helps you, that gives you the right to live in the space that you occupy. And this was the original form of shared ownership before the Strata Property Act took place. And it was pretty popular. And as a result, there was a lot of development of this higher density in the West End, primarily through rental apartment buildings, but then also through these co-op buildings that were being built. But then there was the implementation in the 1970s of the Strata Property Act, and then there was an enormous boom. And they realized they could build these much larger buildings, they could find buyers for them. So you see a lot, in particular in the West End of downtown Vancouver, but starting to sort of in the peripheral areas as well, these high density condo buildings being built, and these were highly successful as well. Now, originally in the 1970s, there was a lot of shared laundry buildings. They didn't have in-suite laundry yet. It was still viewed a little bit of, not ideal. At the time, the real ideal was still to purchase a single family residence. But if you were single, if you didn't have an incredibly high income, then, a small bachelor or a studio or a 1-bedroom or something like that, you purchase something along those lines in the West End or in Kitsilano or in Fairview perhaps. And then through the 80s, we saw a real shift. And as things became more expensive, as we saw inflation happen, as we realized that the densification of Vancouver was happening, as the value of the land was really rising in such a small, desirable city, people were seeing the alternative of the condo lifestyle. And then there was just incredible marketing that was taking place. And there was a real shift in the culture, in the view of people. And I really do believe this began in the 1980s. Also at the time, we had the first full exposure of Vancouver to the world with Expo 86. And that saw a real drive, a real boom in construction, a real boom in the desirability of Vancouver and sort of opening up the doors to the rest of the world. There we saw an enormous boom in the construction of condominium buildings and strata buildings and alternatives to living in a house. And for the first time, people really saw that as a legitimate lifestyle choice. It wasn't just about what was more affordable. It became a matter of what works better for my lifestyle. Do I really want to be cutting my lawn every day? Do I really want to worry about shoveling snow from my sidewalk? People enjoyed the idea of just being able to, own a 2-bedroom in downtown Vancouver and locking the door and walking away and going traveling for a couple months, or not needing to worry about, cleaning the gutters or whatever it happened to be. So there has been a real cultural acceptance of the condo lifestyle for a very long time. I would estimate, from my point of view, it's at least the last 50 years that we've been living in Vancouver where people really believe that living in a condo isn't a step down, that it's a lifestyle option for many people, and increasingly so for families as well. So through, I would say, the last 20, 25 years or so, it's become an increasingly desirable option for families, as the amenities for families in the higher densely populated areas have been improving. And that's adding schools, and that's adding community centers and services for children. So many people, even with kids, don't see it as a necessity to live in a house. And that's just a cultural shift that we haven't yet seen, I would say, in many other North American cities. But it's something that's, already well in place in areas in Asia and in Europe as well, where people are very happily living in apartments. And my own family is an example of that. My parents were immigrants from Germany, and my mother grew up with a family of 6. She had 3 siblings, so 4 children in all, and they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment building in a smaller town outside of Munich. It's something that many people in many parts of the world are ready to accept and have accepted, just a cultural difference that in North America, we're not quite there yet. Vancouver very much is at the forefront of sort of accepting condos as an alternative to owning a house. And accepted so much that, in fact, just in 2023, 70% of all transactions in Greater Vancouver, and I'm not just talking about the most densely populated areas, 70% of the transactions in all of Vancouver are strata, are shared ownership. And in the city of Vancouver, that's actually 74%. It's even higher. So an extraordinary amount of people are purchasing strata, shared ownership. So that could be condominium, it could be a townhouse, or it could be a half duplex. But as high as 74% in the city of Vancouver are purchasing those, and only 26% of buyers are buying houses. So if you're thinking of buying a property in Vancouver, well, I am a real estate agent that's helped hundreds of families settle in Vancouver and buy the right home. My contact information is right here on the screen. Reach out anytime and we can begin a conversation about finding you and your family the best possible area in Metro Vancouver and the best possible home. Let's get back to the video. So the third reason that you're unlikely to be buying a house when you're moving to Vancouver is about the future. So I've been talking about the past a little bit, and what's been happening leading in the last 10 years or so is we've seen a massive amount of growth in Metro Vancouver. There continues to be pressure on the land base. In my opinion, single-family residential lots are a dying breed. There are going to be fewer and fewer of them as we need to build more and more density. There's only one solution to trying to make Vancouver more affordable, and that is to provide more housing. We're just not building enough. There just is too much demand for too little inventory. And so essentially single-family residential lots are kind of a waste of that land. And very consistently over the last 10 years or so, we're seeing a push to do away with single-family residential lots. To this point today, they've essentially been outlawed. There are no new single-family residential lots. Development of the city of Vancouver really ended in the 1970s. This is a city where if you're buying a new house, you're not buying in a new subdivision. What you're buying is a builder has gone in and they've torn down an existing older home and built a new house. It's a one-off basis because there is simply no other land for this to be done. And in order to build a higher density, up until this point, very recently, what that has required is spot rezoning. And so a builder or a developer had to go in and buy a property, a large property ideally, or they would sort of take a risk and assemble a number of smaller properties together and then apply for rezoning with the city. This is called spot rezoning, and it was very ineffective. And there's a lot of risk on the part of the developers to get this done. So only the most deeply pocketed developers could really do this, and the ones with sort of the biggest scope for viewing the potential of what could be. But it was a very long, drawn out process. And this has been one of the main issues people view for why Vancouver has become so expensive, is just that the process of densifying the city has been so long and arduous. Now, at this point, there have been very consistent attempts by all levels of government to make this streamlined and more efficient. And this began a few years ago with the city of Vancouver saying, okay, all the single family residential lots in Vancouver are now you're now allowed to build duplexes. So instead of just one legal owner of a home, you can have on one property 2 owners. Divide one house into the ownership of 2 people. And this was slow to be accepted. Originally, developers weren't too quick to jump on board with this, but today we're seeing a lot of duplex redevelopment happening in areas in many different parts of the city, but specifically in areas like Main Street, Fraser, Commercial Drive. It's being a little slower to be accepted on some of the more expensive areas of the city. And then very recently, the city has the province has basically told the cities that now you're gonna have to start allowing even higher density. So where we said, moving all single family residential to duplex zoning essentially what they're pushing the city to do now is allow townhouses to be built on all single family residential lots. So you can build up to 4 units on a regular city lot. As many as 6 is possible on larger single family residential lots. So anywhere from 4 to 6 units. And the FSR, the coverage, is a single unit. So that means on a single family residential lot, at a time where you used to be able to build 2 half duplexes that would total about 60% coverage, now you can go 100%. So rather than just somewhere around 2,800 square feet, it is now 4,000 square feet that can be divided amongst 4 different units. And so that is a push that is brand new, and another reason that we're going to see a diminishing number of single family residential lots available and new homes being built. The other thing that has been done recently is that the province has also dictated that around SkyTrain stations, which we have many now with so many new SkyTrain lines, within an 800-meter radius, they're dictating that high density must be built. So from as low as 12 stories to 30 stories being built around SkyTrain stations. Those are our minimum numbers, but essentially the province is dictating what the cities are going to do around SkyTrain lines and sort of doing away with the red tape and with the requirement of spot rezoning. And they're just saying, look, we want around all SkyTrain stations to have high density. That just makes sense. You're going to increase the ridership, you're going to increase sort of the livability, the walkability, and the ability for people to get from one place to another. And then on top of that, we're saying we don't want single family residential at all anymore. We want the ability to build higher density, more affordable units. And that is something that is coming. And for these reasons, you're going to see fewer and fewer single family residential lots, not just today, but into the future as well. And increasingly, owning a single family house in Vancouver and in the suburbs around Vancouver is increasingly, if it's not already, going to be a luxury. And you will need a significant amount of money to be able to afford that luxury. Now, before I get into what you're likely to gonna buy if it's not a house and where you're likely gonna find it, let's talk about the most obvious reason that you're not gonna be buying a house in Metro Vancouver. And that obvious reason is affordability. It's the cost of housing. And I talk about it constantly in my videos, just how expensive Vancouver is. And it's expensive for very good reason. We live in an incredibly small geographic space. It's incredibly highly desirable. We are surrounded, confined by geography, with the mountains to the north, with the ocean to the east, with the US border to the south. And did I say the ocean to the east? I meant the ocean to the west. And to the east, more mountains if you go far enough, but also the agricultural land reserve. And so we're pinned in, confined, we have nowhere else to go. And the result is prices just continue to rise. And today, in order to own a single family residential property in Metro Vancouver, you're looking at needing to spend over $2 million. So in June of 2024, the benchmark price for a house in Metro Vancouver is $2,062,600. That's an increase of 5.9% over the last year. Within Vancouver, within Metro Vancouver, the city of Vancouver is one of the most expensive areas. And so in the city of Vancouver, you're going to be spending $2,669,500, an increase of 6.6% over the last year. In Richmond, still over the average, you're looking at $2,218,600, an increase of 1.2%. But as you go a little bit further east, you're going to find that prices do drop. In Coquitlam, as an example, you're looking at $1,854,400, an increase of 4.9%. In the city of Surrey, what we consider one of the more affordable, close-in suburbs of Vancouver, you're looking at $1,575,900, an increase of 2.9%. And then what might be one of the most affordable nearby suburbs is the city of Mission. And in Mission, it's $1,046,700, up 1.3%. So even from Mission, and Mission is fairly well connected to Vancouver. One of the great things about Mission is it does feel like you're in a little bit of the countryside, but you're also connected to Vancouver with the West Coast Express. So you can still commute into downtown Vancouver or one of the neighboring suburbs fairly easily, which people really love about Mission. So basically anywhere you look in Metro Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, you're going to be spending over $1 million in order to buy a single family residential property. As a result, that is a luxury purchase. And it's a purchase that people aren't going to do easily or afford easily. You need a very high income to be able to afford owning a house no matter where you are in Metro Vancouver. And for those reasons, most people aren't going to be buying a house. And if they do buy a house, they tend to stay in them for a very long time. And that also shrinks the number of transactions that tends to be done when it comes to owning a house. Condos tend to flip a little more quickly and easily as people sort of transition through different stages of their lives. But once people find a house that they're happy with, that they can finally afford, well, then they're very unlikely to be moving from that house, and they stay in them for a very long time. But one of the most important reasons that people are not owning and buying houses really does come down to affordability. All right, so now comes the question of what are you actually gonna buy and where are you gonna buy it? So if people aren't buying houses, what are they buying? And just how long has this been going on? As I said earlier in this video, we have a long-standing history of people looking at alternatives to owning a house in Vancouver. This goes back well over a 25-year period, but I just chose to show you, to illustrate this with stats from 25 years ago. So in 1998, 51% of all transactions in the city of Vancouver were for stratas, whether that is for half duplexes, condos, or townhouses. But only 49% of transactions, even in 1998, were for single family residential houses. Now, fast forward to 2023, the last time that we have a full year's worth of data, this number has gone way up to 74%. In 2023, 74% of all transactions were for stratas, and only 26% of transactions, 26% of all buyers in the marketplace in 2023 in Vancouver were buying houses. And what did this break down to? Now, 80% of all strata sales were for condos. So that means only 20% were either townhouses or half duplexes. That's a much smaller part of the market. So if you're looking to purchase in Vancouver, it's much more likely that you're going to be buying a condo than any other form of housing. And if you have a family, you're likely looking for a 3-bedroom property, right? Well, if you are looking for a 3-bedroom property, it actually becomes way less likely that you're going to be buying a condo. Only 6% of all condo transactions were 3 bedrooms in Vancouver. It's something like 200 of them. Very few. We just don't have a lot of 3-bedroom condos in Vancouver. You start to see them a little more as you get out into further suburbs. So if you really are looking for an affordable 3-bedroom option, you can't beat a condo. That is going to be the lowest price per square foot. It's going to give you the best value, but you're not really going to find them in the city of Vancouver. So if you are looking for those, you're more likely going to need to move out into the suburbs where land is considerably less valuable than it is sort of close to the center of the city. Areas like Maple Ridge, like Surrey, like Abbotsford, you're gonna find a lot more affordability when it comes to condos, and you're gonna find a lot more options when it comes to larger condos, like 3 bedrooms. But going back to Vancouver, 56% of all townhouse transactions were over 3 bedrooms. And then 94% of all half duplexes were 3 bedrooms or more. And so in my experience, if people are looking for alternatives to owning a house and they want to be in the city or close to the city, they're much more likely going to be looking at townhouses as an option or half duplexes. And townhouses can be great. They're typically 3 levels. You typically do have 3 bedrooms. There's a nice community. You don't have to worry about all the maintenance and all the updates that have to take place on your home. Sometimes you'll get a detached garage, and sometimes you'll also get a little bit of yard. But more than likely, you do get some nice outdoor space. Sometimes it's just larger balconies, maybe a porch. But if you're really looking for a piece of land, more green space, a yard, and definitely an attached garage or detached garage, well, then you're more likely gonna want a half duplex. For my money, this is where I see some of the best value these days. It really does give you the feeling of living in a house, but it makes it much less expensive because essentially you are splitting one property in half between 2 owners. And so it brings down the price point really considerably. And that's really, I find, that's the sweet spot for a lot of people these days. But this is predominantly sort of with families in mind. I mean, if you're not a family, you don't need 3 bedrooms. You don't need over 1,000 square feet. Well, you can find good affordability in relative terms with condos, and whether that is a studio, a 1 bedroom, or a 2 bedroom. you would most likely be happy in that space. But really what it comes down to these days is that buying a house in Vancouver really is a luxury because of the reasons that I've gone over, and especially because of sort of the war on single family residential lots. These are going to diminish. You know, if I was giving advice to my clients, what I do give them is the advice that you should buy as much land as you can possibly afford, because really that is where all of the value is. That is what you're purchasing. That is the largest part of the cost of buying housing in Vancouver. If you can buy a single family residential lot today, I would do it. But if all that is within your affordability is buying a half duplex, I would do that. And for this, at the same time, I would buy a condo. If that is the most that you can afford comfortably within your budget, whether that condo is in downtown Vancouver or is in Surrey or is in Coquitlam, you buy where you can afford it. But in the long term, what we are seeing is immense amounts of growth, immense amounts of demand. Rents are only going up. And while rents may seem relatively affordable today, as the desirability continues to increase, as people continue to move to Vancouver, the cost of housing, whether it is owning or renting, is going to continue to increase. And that's the part of the equation that I find so many people who choose to rent don't understand or don't fully contemplate, is how much is the rent going to be in 10, 20, 30 years from now. By owning today, you're going to be able to control the cost. Yes, there are interest rates that as we've seen in the last couple of years, they can increase, and that can increase the cost of ownership as well. But if you live within your means, if you purchase within your means, you can find affordable housing in relative terms in Metro Vancouver. Might not be right in the city center, it might be further out into some of the suburbs. If you are looking to purchase a house that is a little more affordable, sort of in that $1 million to $1.5 million range, you're gonna be looking in some of the more quote unquote affordable suburbs, areas like Mission, like Maple Ridge, like Abbotsford and Surrey. But in all probability, what you are going to be buying is not a house, because as I've been saying, it's becoming an increasingly luxury item, and more people are purchasing condos, townhouses, and half duplexes. And if you want to find better values for those, you go into those same suburbs and you look in areas like Surrey, like Mission, like Abbotsford, and you're going to find where I talked about the prices, the benchmark prices of houses. For a townhouse, you're looking typically at about half that amount of money. So in Vancouver, it's about 1.3 million. In Surrey, I think it's around 900,000 for a typical townhouse these days. In relative terms, compared to what it costs you to own a house, it is much more affordable to own a townhouse in every single municipality throughout Metro Vancouver. So with more than 70% of all transactions in Metro Vancouver being for strata property and not houses, and in the city of Vancouver, just 26% of all transactions being houses, the likelihood is when you move to Vancouver and you purchase a home, it's not going to be a house. You need to be considering these other options, and they are fantastic options. They're very livable. People have wonderful experiences living in all types of different homes in Metro Vancouver, whether it is a condo, townhouse, or half duplex. But you may find you need to explore those options a little bit before you fully understand what is the right fit for you. And that's where I can come in. I am a real estate agent that's helped hundreds of families move here. I can help you as well. I can help you figure this out. Reach out anytime and we can begin that discussion. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, smash that subscribe button if you want to see more videos just like this one. Be sure to watch all the rest of my catalog of videos. I have well over 70 videos now, going into all sorts of different topics, but I think what you're gonna enjoy most of all right now is meeting me in two videos that I have in mind for you. This one over here is all about buying condos in Vancouver, and then this one over here is all about buying townhouses. Check those videos out, and I'll see you on next week's video. Thanks so much for watching.